speakers, which in theory should take us over here. Now I'm getting told the stream is dead. Hope everyone's enjoying this as much as I am. Stream is back. I was about to get up again. No, audio, I appreciate you telling us about the audio problem. We again, have plenty of time to get into this. I'm back. Okay. Not sure what's going on there, but we will get into this, and I will try to figure out what I can do to... I'm just going to shut down all my audio, and maybe that'll do it. So I've shut down all my audio output, so I have no idea why there would be an echo, and I still see it's taking my audio input. So let's get into it and talk about this slate. Sorry for the random technical issues. Good to know that it is on my side, though, so hopefully I'll be able to figure this out, do some research. And it's peculiar. Switch to my other rig, maybe. So, sorry, getting comments now from the staff wondering what was going on there. It's way better. Okay, well, I shut down all my output, so usually when you get some sort of feedback or audio issue, it has something to do with input-output. But if you're saying the stream is live, let's assume the stream is go. No, it's the audio should be perfect. There's no reason, especially in this day and age, why we can't have good audio. So, but I will look into that and have a convo with Josh if I can before he goes away on his magical mystery trip. All right, so 4 games this evening. We'll just go ahead and start. We're going to be revamping the format going forward. Again, there's several hours of content here on Awesemo for free every single day. Leading to Live Before Lock. And again, the chief purpose of Live Before Lock is to hopefully provide a nice spot for pivoting as we get breaking information, as we frequently do in the NBA towards lock, and that's always going to be our primary goal. But we're also going to pivot a little more away from going through every game. This evening aside. This evening I'm going to sit here and do what needs to be done. They're saying I should talk with the other Eddie Lai about the audio issues, and yeah, that's fine. Josh is the guy who walked me through the setting up of the OBS and the various other software we use, but we'll figure it out on the SOD. If we're working now, we'll get to that at some point. So, anyhow, we'll just get into tonight's slate. We can talk about the reformatting and other things if there is some spare time later. Let's go ahead and talk about this first game, the Lakers versus the Rockets. Obviously, your two mega studs of the evening on this slate, and it sort of leads to a couple different bifurcations as to whether or not you are going to play one, both, or neither of LeBron James and James Harden, and also a similar situation is whether you're going to play one, both, or neither of James Harden and Chris Paul, which have different criteria. So I generally prefer James Harden to LeBron James tonight. I feel I have him projected for 4 points higher. I have him projected for slightly lower ownership. I'm going to load up our ownership projections, which is something else I plan on featuring a little bit more going forward on Live Before Lock, because obviously a critical piece of being profitable in this day and age. And we do in our ownership projections right now have LeBron James at slightly higher ownership than James Harden. So I am mildly more excited about playing James Harden than I am playing LeBron James. And this is by merit of a few things. Again, I would rather play against the Rockets in general than, or I'm sorry, I'd rather play against the Lakers than against the Rockets in general, although, again, this Rockets team defensively, not as good as its predecessors, still quite a bit better than this Lakers team. As far as past history, when you're dealing with Harden against LeBron and LeBron against Harden, or Harden against the Lakers and LeBron against the Rockets, if you look at basically any trends leading into this match, most of them lead me to prefer James Harden, and if I'm getting him slightly lower owned, then that's the guy I would rather set up with. I don't feel incredibly strongly about this at all, but if they played this game out 100 times, I think you have Harden outscoring LeBron 53 of them, and that's enough for me, especially if he's at ownership, if I'm playing one of those guys to play James Harden in that case. So these two teams played not long after opening day, sort of the start of the year. And yes, in that game, if you're looking, you did get something close to 60 out of Harden, and you only got 45 or 50 out of early season LeBron, who was still sort of getting his feet under him. You only had 5 assists and 5 rebounds in that game. The rebounds, at least, sort of an oddly and somewhat random small figure to get out of him. He's playing down in the lineup more than he was back then. You get sort of some LeBron at the 5 minutes or Kuzma at the 5 minutes, but he is located closer to the basket, which has picked up his rebounding numbers, and I would expect that to continue. Regarding the the Harden-Paul situation, obviously we had some fireworks the last time these couple teams got together. Again, Ingram not playing tonight and Rondo not playing tonight for non-spitting reasons, but Chris Paul still in here. But it is worth pointing out that in that first game of the season, you did manage to get a good game out of both of those guys. You got 55 DraftKings points in less than 30 minutes out of Chris Paul and 58 DraftKings points in 38 minutes out of James Harden. So on a 4-game slate, I'm much more amenable to the idea of playing both these guys than I would be on a larger slate, because what they need to do to be considered both successful is a lot different. Now, it's a little easier on FanDuel to do that if you wanted to, because Chris Paul is just well more advantageously priced. On DraftKings, I don't still have an issue if you're stacking this game, if you're somehow interested in doing that and you're trying to figure out these scenarios where you would have Paul and Harden, but not LeBron, but this game stays close, so you're thinking that a couple guys on the Lakers have to be good. Who are those guys that you're stepping on? There's someone hitting me with a quote right now, and we're going to segue a little bit here about the Mexico City game. Mexico City is a very thin air. I think it's slightly higher, slightly lower than Denver, but it's also a good mile up in the air. And the thin air is a real thing. Now, both teams have been there and getting some time in. Both the Magic and the Bulls have been there for more than a day and have had some workouts to try to acclimate themselves a little bit. But it's a real thing ever since, I think, the '68 Olympics were in Mexico City. And it's a real thing. You had, people hitting the ground. So talking about, how to view this or think anything about it, one, I do think that it is a strike against the game. It's not good that the game is in Mexico City as opposed to in Orlando or Chicago. And these are both teams with a bench deep enough that I would guess the minutes even out. Maybe. There's a chance there's no effect. I think there will be an effect, and I think the effect will be that minutes will be shared a little more equally than you would expect, especially amongst the players who are a little older, maybe not in the world's best shape. Players returning from injury like Lauri Markkanen, who, has looked fine running out there for 30 minutes, but, 30 minutes in Chicago is a little different than 30 minutes in Mexico City. So for that reason, because, the Bulls are running very, very deep, and getting a lot of stars back, so both the usage and the minutes are all jumbled up on that team right now. If there is a game I was looking to avoid, if I was building one lineup and I was like, I really don't like that game, or I just want to have one guy from a game, that's the game I'm probably least excited about grabbing a player from. It has what I think is the lowest over-under on the slate. It was under 210 last I looked. And obviously, Vooch looks like a strong play. It is a strong play. I can think of a couple guys I'd be interested in pivoting to off of him. Makes a lot of sense to play him. But I do think the altitude on a 4-game slate is something you can certainly raise an eyebrow at and have concerns that it is something. And this is not, a new thing. They have been running games in Mexico for a few years now. Getting used to the thin air and the relative amounts of oxygen in the air, which, I mean, they're nice. You're jumping a little bit higher. In those 68 Olympics, I think those are the Olympics Bob Beamon set the long jump record that stood for a long time. So Zach LaVine can get an extra inch of vertical tonight. It's not particularly relevant, but I would not be shocked. This game's certainly not impossible. It could blow out here. This is a very bad Chicago Bulls team and a Magic team that's been better than all of us expected. I'll put it that way. So maybe the Magic get over on them, but would not surprise me if the top end minutes get limited a little bit due to the climate factor there. And the fact that, I do think both the coaches and the players sort of resent the situation a little bit. You get that vibe from a lot of the interviews you're giving, and a number of the players on both teams have mentioned, how they see themselves getting winded a little easier. So, it makes it a lot easier to get off guys. So I'm actually just going to pivot straight to that game, and we'll come back to this other one. So looking at the Magic and the Bulls, so let's talk about Vooch. Vooch, on paper, I'm just going to sort of bounce around a lot tonight because I presume most of you have all the basic information for the slate. You don't need me to go through and say, Lonzo's much cheaper on DK and Chris Paul's much cheaper on FanDuel, and playing Paul next to Harden is always a little dicey. But there's a lot of so I'm going to talk about little edges, little things we can do here. Again, it's a 4-game slate. I'm a big fan of not necessarily having consistent exposure. And whereas I think some breaking news, especially with Dallas, could lead to some edge as we get towards lock. And I hope that hits so that maybe we can make a couple people some dollars tonight. As it sits right now, doesn't feel like the most advantageous spot in the world. So Vooch has been really good, and this matchup is about as good as it gets. Maybe not the best, just because the pace. These are not a couple fast teams, and you see that reflected in the over/under. But there is no reason to think that he shouldn't have a very good game here. He's especially well priced on FanDuel, where he's dollar for dollar cheaper than he is on DK, which is usually a sign someone is priced fairly well. But is going to be very popular. If you look at our ownership projections right now, we have him second on DraftKings after only the seemingly ubiquitous DeAnthony Melton, and on FanDuel we have him as number 1 man. He's on top of Melton. That has something to do with him being priced better on FanDuel and Melton being priced significantly worse. But if I'm building one lineup, certainly on FanDuel and probably even on DraftKings, I'll probably try to go somewhere else because I do think there is a ceiling for several other centers, most notably DeAndre Jordan and Ayton across from him in that same game. If we look at the time that they got together, which was opening day actually, I think, but whenever the Mavericks and the Suns played at the beginning of this year, and the Suns won that game, by the way. You got a very nice game out of Ayton in what I believe was his pro debut. He had 45 DK points, 18 and 10 double-double. Now, we have, I think, very reasonably a fair amount of concern looking at Ayton, and it certainly would be tournaments only for me. In cash, I would prefer Vooch. I would prefer DeAndre Jordan between those guys. But Ayton is still getting 30 minutes. If you think this game stays close, and certainly I expect basically all the games tonight to stay close. The biggest line is 5.5, so no particular reason to think any of them blow out other than Mexico is weird and the Bulls are really terrible, much more terrible than their personnel would suggest. And their coach is, I don't know, maybe their coach has them doing wind sprints in Mexico City and running suicides. That would seem to be not the best idea. But Ayton in his last couple of games has 27 and 30 minutes, 46 and 37 fantasy points. Did just fine against DeAndre Jordan when they played earlier this year, had 45 fantasy points, and is still priced pretty reasonably. And if you're telling me I'm going to get Ayton at 17% and Vooch at 45 on FanDuel, or I'm going to get Ayton at 15% and Vooch at 38 on DK, I'm reasonably interested in playing DeAndre Ayton in that spot. And when you talk about your other DeAndre here, DeAndre Jordan, certainly just a matchup in which, if it happens to flow his way and he gets his offensive game going, which is really difficult to predict, there's certainly nothing about DeAndre Ayton that should particularly stop him. So, and his price is, very advantageous. If you think that game stays close, he's always a threat to pull down 22 rebounds and, is saving you $1,800, $1,900 versus Vooch. I think Vooch is the best point per dollar play of all these centers. I think he probably has the largest upside, but he is, playing in the caldera of a volcano. It's a bit of an exaggeration, but he is playing in an environment where we certainly can see things get a little more squirrely. Again, it probably won't go as bad as a couple of years ago. I think it's 4 years ago. 4 years or 3 years ago, the first or second of the Mexico City games, we had the Spurs and the Timberwolves. Kevin Love was in this game, or not in this game, rather, as he didn't play. So it actually may have been 5 years ago. But they had a fire in an elevator, and the game didn't play. And that was one of the greatest people bitching at FanDuel and DraftKings, give me my money back because you got zeroed for everyone in that game and there was no late swap and yada, yada, yada. So other guys from this game, another center who I have a fair amount of interest in and who I expect to enter some kind of ownership would be Wendell Carter. He's the guy who I think is sort of most immune from the minutes degradation we've seen with the return of Markkanen and Portis and Dunn. He still played 30 minutes in his last game. And in competitive games, I do not have him capped at much less than 34, 35, and he's still $5,200 on DK. So on FanDuel, he's not going to be one of your best point per dollar power forwards, but still makes plenty of sense. And none of the other power forwards are really, minted on this slate, whether or not you're talking about Gordon in that same game, who is not cheap, and dealing with those same altitude issues, or LaMarcus Aldridge, who no one who's played DFS this year needs to be told how low of a floor he carries this year. So, yeah, but I still like Wendell Carter at $5,200, and in a sense, Wendell Carter is also just saying, okay, I want to not play Vooch. I think Vooch is 40-50% owned. I'm going to spend $5,200 on Wendell Carter, or I'm going to have, one of the power forward center hybrids as my center, and I think that does give you, I think most people will run in one of those centers, and a vacuum points per dollar, that is a good idea. Center is generally the most underpriced position on DraftKings. There are generally values every day, but their center is usually a beating, and double center is often the correct, certainly cash decision to make, because they are relatively underpriced on DraftKings, just points per dollar for the people at that position. I imagine you continue to get a bleed of minutes from Ryan Arcidiacono onto Chris Dunn, who's returned. Chris Dunn's price is at $5,400, $5,500. Ryan Arcidiacono is all the way down at $3,600, $3,500. I don't think Archie is completely out of play in a tournament. On FanDuel, you will have what feels like an uncomfortably large amount of Bryn Forbes playing point guard, as he is the minimum there. You can spend $100 more and get Ryan Arcidiacono, or $200 more and get a better sort of leverage contrarian play in playing Patty Mills in that same spot. Both of those make plenty of sense in tournaments, but Forbes obviously coming off an incredible game by Bryn Forbes standards, where he scored 43 fantasy points, and again, he cost the minimum. So, the game before that is worth pointing out. He also played 31 minutes against Utah. And it's also worth pointing out that this 43-point game came against Phoenix. So, certainly a number of warning signs there for him. But 31 and 32 minutes the last two games after not getting to 30 for 9 or 10 games in a row. We can certainly hope that this represents the new normal. This Clippers team has given up well more production to point guards than I expected this year with the personnel they were rolling out there. I like Shea's defense for a rookie, certainly. I liked Pat Beverly. And even back when he was playing well more minutes than he is now, point guards were surprisingly effective against this Clippers team. Sorry if I'm a bit scatterbrained. I didn't prepare for the solo show, so I'm just sort of winging it here. Usually I have our excellent hosts who handle the ball and just give me questions and I answer them. Now there's a lot of air to fill. So looking at this game, Lauri Markkanen, again, objectively looks good. He should probably cost a few $100s more than he does. He's 6.5 basically on both sites. and has looked good since he's come back. He's strung together a couple decent games here, and has been back for, I think this is his 6th game since returning from that absence. The first few were exceptionally good. He had a couple in a row at 40, and then there was the obvious complete dismantling at the hands of Boston, which I think is being very generous to call a basketball game. But in the other relevant games, he's playing 29 to 32 minutes or something. That generally, feels pretty good. You worry about him returning, not being in the best conditioning, and now trying to play this game in Mexico City. But even if he plays 28 minutes, he can certainly smash that price. And if you are not comfortable with the punt options, which are certainly a little specious, and you're not comfortable with the pay-up options, which, especially on FanDuel, DK, they brought Aldridge's price down low enough that I legitimately like LaMarcus Aldridge as a play. I very much like DeMar DeRozan as a play. But, on FanDuel especially, if you're more comfortable throwing some money behind Lauri Markkanen, he will not flat leave you dry and does carry with him a really significant upside. I am normally under the rest of the hosts on channel, apparently, for my takes on Zach LaVine. I still think it's perfectly fine to run out there in any sort of cashy format. Obviously, a guy who can, get a massive amount of usage and make all his shots and throw up the 50 burger, but it happens fairly rarely, and I don't think it becomes more likely playing in Mexico City against a slow team and re-adding, Chris Dunn and Bobby Portis back into the rotation, plus Markkanen as well, which I think just of and by itself started to cap the upside because, again, Markkanen going to take double-digit shots every day. The number of shots that you've seen from LaVine is going to consistently come down. If you look at the last few games, 18 shots, 6 in that completely ridiculous game against Boston, 13 against the Kings, which is a spot that you would think you would really want to like him. I was kind of off him in that spot, and it's just because the ceiling has sort of been priced out there. So I am a fan of spending an extra $1,000 on DraftKings to get up to DeRozan. FanDuel, that's a little stickier, where DeRozan is, a full 9,600. But I still like him just plenty in tournaments there. This is a spot in which you can absolutely put forward a very big upside. These two teams did get together on my birthday, if memory serves. I think it was November 15th, as I recall watching this game on my birthday. But the Spurs were in LA for that game, so they're home now. But it was a close game, and you got a very good game out of DeMar DeRozan and a perfectly reasonable one out of LaMarcus Aldridge. And Bryn Forbes started that game as well. Not that that tends to mean a lot, but so let's see, other things to discuss here. I'm just going to bounce game to game and talk about things when they come to mind. I don't mind Bobby Portis on FanDuel at a sticky power forward position at $4,800. Probably plays 20 minutes, maybe get 24. But again, if you think there is a narrowing effect on the minutes due to the somewhat harsh climate, instead of getting 30 for Markkanen and 18 for Portis or something distribution like that, maybe you get 26 for Markkanen and 22 for Portis and 22 minutes, Bobby Portis getting 30s. Certainly not an unheralded or impossible to occur situation. It has happened many, many times in the past. Let's talk about some other guys. Again, it's a 4-game slate, so there is basically no one who you project to get minutes who would be out of play. Like, I don't like Justin Holiday. We're adding a lot of, guys around him who have higher usage. He's never been the biggest ceiling guy due to his lack of ability to put up peripherals. But it's a 4-game slate. If you end up with Justin Holiday in your lineup, that makes sense. Wouldn't have him in one lineup, but certainly would be exposed if I was playing 10 or more there. Jabari Parker, I might entirely avoid the way the minutes are being distributed on this team. I really don't expect him to see enough time to be able to put up, any sort of tournament upside. Went all the way down to 19 minutes last game. That's not very impressive. What are my thoughts on Rudy Gay? Yeah, I imagine he stays starting. I do think this game stays competitive. I mean, when you're talking about these guys, when the game is competitive, you almost always get full Rudy Gay minutes. You always get Aldridge minutes and DeRozan minutes. And it is worth going over again, and those of you who've watched me for a few years have heard me go on this spiel 72 times, but the smaller the slate is, the better it is to stack a game or to avoid a game. Being more focused on a game, or even 2 games, is better the fewer games are on the slate. If there's 11 games, stacking a game is not impossible, and there's rare times I've mentioned it. We did it in, Washington and Atlanta, but it's usually a bad idea. Tonight, it's just a fine idea to be like, okay, I'm gonna stick on these 2 games. The correlation is well more worth it. Thoughts on DFS? He's so cheap. Yeah, so let's go and talk about Dallas and Phoenix. Let's bounce all the way to this last game of the evening, and again, we have to play this a little differently if we're playing on FanDuel or DraftKings. So we have J.J. Barea and Dennis Smith questionable. So let's talk about what we do here. If they're both out, the immediate guy we want to look to is somewhat obviously Jalen Brunson. Again, last game was perilously disappointing, and to a certain extent he was going to regress. He was coming off, I think, back-to-back 7 of 9 shooting games in there. He wasn't going to shoot 78% from the field for his entire career. These numbers were going to come down at some point, and he is a perilously low usage guy. And I was doing the recap Periscope last night, and someone asked about whether or not he was going to have sort of a quick trigger, and I'm like, well, they had a quick hook on Dennis Smith Jr., who certainly has more cachet than Jalen Brunson at this point in his career. And earlier this year, if Dennis Smith Jr. was playing well, he'd play 32 minutes. If he was playing badly, he'd play 19 minutes. So certainly Jalen Brunson is going to be he will be closely watched. And last night, if it wasn't for the injury to Barea, I don't think he was getting as many minutes as he did. I think he was not finishing the end of that game. They will let Luka basically run the point, or if Barea is in, have him back in there. So Jalen Brunson for me is you need both Smith and Barea out, I think. If they're both also out, that should give us a fairly significant boost to Luka Doncic most, who in a not dissimilar situation last night against a really porous defensive team, one that even doesn't necessarily play that fast, managed to go out and throw up his 50-burger in that game, which isn't something he frequently does. But hands are on the ball enough there that would make obviously a lot of sense, and I would try to expose up. There's nothing wrong with playing Luka now, just based on the fact that might happen if you're playing, say, on FanDuel, where you don't have time to make that pivot. Obviously, if they're both out, Brunson, as we mentioned, and then the other guy would portend a lot of minutes for Dorian Finney-Smith, who would go from playing as few as 16 minutes, depending on everyone exactly who's out, to playing all the way up and possibly playing 30, 32 minutes. And I never like recommending or playing Dorian Finney-Smith, but at that point DFS would have a lot of merit as a punt play. But I'd want them both out until I was happy about going there. If they were both out, I'd be very happy to start playing out some of these other punts and playing Dorian Finney-Smith. If one of them's out, I think he's in play. If they're both in, I don't want to play either of them. And again, we may not have this news in time. Harrison Barnes still makes a lot of sense where he's pretty cheap on FanDuel at small forward, obviously. But he and Wesley Matthews and DeAndre Jordan would also get boosts if these other guys were out. Nola for Devin Harris if both are out. I would put Devin Harris in play for me. I still think you're getting 12, 14 minutes, but he's priced at whatever, 3,200, 3,400. So if they're both out, I think Devin Harris has a much better crack at the rotation. But I have concerns, with exactly how the minutes go here, especially if all these guys are in. Dirk is going to make his debut. I don't think we have a particularly wonderful idea yet exactly how many minutes that will portend. But there's the Mavs and Carlisle really enjoy running very even minutes distribution. So especially if you then end up loading up on Luka, who's going to see a lot of time, and DeAndre kind of by necessity. Wesley isn't 100%. Maybe they try to take it a little easy on him. Harrison Barnes isn't going to get his time. So there's a real situation where you have a lot of guys getting 17 minutes in this game. So I'm not sure I discussed that as in-depth as I wanted to. If Barea is in and Dennis Smith is out, I think he makes an excellent tournament play. You should be perfectly happy to go there. But again, certainly nothing near cash. Holmes or Tucker on DK cash. I would probably play Tucker because the presence of Eric Moreland has me a little bit concerned. I think Eric Moreland, I left him in my GPP rankings. I think he's going to get in and play. I hope he doesn't reduce minutes from number 1 overall draft pick, Ayton. But And so for that reason, I have to be a little sketchy about Rashawn Holmes for that reason. So just for that reason, because I expect the ownership to be fairly similar, and I do think Moreland sees the court, I will go the other way and go with PJ Tucker there. Let's see. Other things to talk about. TJ Warren hasn't had a monster game in this situation, but he's another day healthier. He's only 5,800 on DK, and he is a guy who can put up a really big number in a hurry. Obviously, that can also go sideways in a hurry, but both FanDuel and DraftKings, TJ Warren makes a lot of sense as a play. I think that's interesting. I legit like Trevor Ariza at his ownership. There are a couple guys on this slate who will go under-owned for one reason or another, and one of them is Trevor Ariza. No one's certain he's going to play. I don't know what take they had on the earlier show. He said, I'm going to play. I think he's going to play. Especially on DraftKings where you're just fading it. Like I said, he would start. We will get the Suns are starting this lineup, which is good 90% of the time. And Trevor Ariza, while nobody's favorite guy, least of all mine, is someone who definitely has been a moneymaker this year. There have been a number of good spots in which I've said play him or play him over some pivot. I know some people deride it, but in his last 4 games, he has 28 or more fantasy points in 4 of them. He costs $5,000. He's playing at home against a Mavs team that, by the way, plays very badly on the road and very badly on back-to-backs. And I think this game ends up being fairly close. So yeah, it sucks, and no one ever feels good saying this, but I like Trevor Ariza. He is a bit too maligned. On DK, he's a little bit cheaper. On FanDuel, he gets 3 for a steal, which is certainly something that he can do with active hands as a defender. I'm gonna go back to the beginning of the year and count the number of games he got 30 or more fantasy points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like it's a thing. So yeah, it feels dirty, but I sort of like looking at a play and going, ooh, I don't want to do that. Then I'm usually like, okay, that probably means other people don't want to do that, so I want to do that. And if he starts, you presume he plays full minutes. That's something else someone said to me. They're like, I'm worried he doesn't play as many minutes. I'm like, if they are saving him for a trade, which makes sense. It seems like he'll very likely be traded soon, as early as tomorrow, as is rumored. Then sure, it would make sense to not play him. But assuming he plays, they're really going to play him and be like, well, we'll only give him 21 minutes because he's going to get traded. Maybe it's less likely he gets 46, but if they're going to play him, I think they're going to play him. So let's talk about the world's best basketball player, apparently, DeAnthony Melton. He's good. Those of you who have been with me all the way through Summer League, going back to previous companies hosted for, will know this is someone we talked about a bit. I liked his game. He was the Rockets' only draft pick this year. I think he was wherever in the middle of the second round that they got him because it was via trade. But he wasn't as good of a defender as Shaq Harrison, who they expurgated, or various other guys who they got rid of because they could play defense. But he's perfectly competent. Has active hands and can get you a steal or two. And is just well underpriced on DK. So he's pretty good chalk. He's getting towards the ownership level where I really don't mind the fade either. Like, if he is truly 65 to 70% owned, which is about what I thought this morning, and what I'm thinking our ownership says as well, because someone, I think that's what I saw, and other people are quoting that number at me as well. Yeah, 66% is what we currently have as the ownership on DeAnthony Melton. Then obviously that makes sense also to get away. So I think if I was building a lineup on FanDuel, he would not be in it. If I was building a lineup on DraftKings, he probably would be. There's just other places I would rather differentiate, and they have largely gotten rid of other point guards on this team. So you're just sort of fading a truly wretched performance a la Brunson last night. But that is well less likely out of him in this environment. So points per dollar, he's almost certainly the best play on the slate on DraftKings, and would get high on the list on FanDuel, even at $6,000. Where again on FanDuel, the mid point guard tier basically doesn't exist, or it's just guys who are overpriced. I mean, the point guards, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is appropriately priced. That's a good matchup. It's one I've talked about where I think at least a significant upside is frequently carried by point guards in matchups with the Spurs. Although it is worth pointing out that he was dreadful when they played earlier this year. He had some sub 20 fantasy point number. I'll look it up. It's in here somewhere. Hold on. That's a Mavs game. Spurs game. So they played earlier this year, for context. It was on my birthday. There you go. The Clippers won 116-111 at home. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander played 27 minutes and had 14 fantasy points. That's pretty ugly. Is Hart an okay pivot off of Melton on DK GPP? I mean, it has nothing to do with Melton at that point. Melton is he an okay pivot off Melton? There's no reason to expect him to score anywhere near that number of fantasy points. I would probably project Melton's fantasy points for somewhere in the area of 31 or 32. He'd end up out there. I'd project Josh Hart for like 22. So now you're saving DK $700, I think is the number on Josh Hart, answering your question there. And I have no issue with you playing Josh Hart. Josh Hart plays enough minutes that if he has just a slightly above average game and puts together a fantasy point a minute, oh, he's great. Now, he hasn't had much usage. He's getting 10 usage in some of these games. But it has nothing to do with Melton. Hart is no better or worse next to Melton or away from Melton. So is it okay to play Josh Hart? Sure, it's just fine. He's fine to play in cash. He's fine to play in tournaments. There's no reason points for dollar to expect him to be particularly close to what Melton is going to put up. Is just a guy who's just going to touch the ball constantly. Any idea which games would be worth a game stack on this slate? Let me see if there's any games that wouldn't be worth a game stack, and then I'll sort of rank them as my preference of stacking them. I think the game I would like to stack least would be that Chicago-Orlando game, just because I'm concerned that at least some of the players in the game, due to the environment, see a little less playing time. That many of the splits that normally go 32 and 16 instead go 28 and 20. And that's, I guess, better for the guys playing 20. That makes me like Mo Bamba a little bit, who probably wants to prove himself and is coming back from his one-game, suspension for violating team rules. So if you're looking at, sort of the bench guys there, I suppose you could look at this as advantageous for them. But that's probably the game I'm least interested in stacking. Past that, it's really difficult to stack the Clippers and San Antonio game, relatively. But it just means that you basically end up fading the significant parts of the Lakers and Houston. Like, you can stack the Clippers and the Spurs, but you're playing, I'll assume, at least 3 out of the 4 of DeRozan, Aldridge, Harris, Gallinari, and that just ends up being a lot of your money to play those guys. But we should talk about those early games, the Texas and California games. That's interesting because you have LA and Houston and LA and San Antonio, them both traveling around. You can't listen to shows anymore because you keep hearing the notifications on my computers and it pisses you off. You can hear notifications on my computers have completely killed my audio. Okay, let me try dragging this number all the way down. But if I had to pick a game to stack, which would it be? Either the second or the fourth chronologically. Probably Dallas and Phoenix. I think, if I was stacking, I would end up playing I would probably play that game, and I would play something like Doncic, Ayton, Ariza, Wesley Matthews, and another guy or something like that. Harden and Valanciunas. Oh, that's J-Val. That's got to mean something. Maybe it's supposed to be Jamal and not Javal, although that's 3 keys away on the keyboard. I don't know how you do that. I don't get your question. Lonzo and Wendell Carter Jr. or TJ Warren and Eric Gordon. Yeah, Eric Gordon is... You guys can hear my notifications? That's incredibly... I may have the stream open as well, and that's playing your audio twice. I almost certainly do not have the stream open, but let me close all Twitter windows in case one of them had picked it up, because you're not getting any notifications through the. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. I didn't realize that those were going and were bugging people. So I've killed my notifications, and hopefully that fixes it. I can't hear anything, so I have absolutely no idea that you can hear them every time. See, this is really useful stuff to know. So let's see. Jonathan Isaac, I like a fair amount in tournaments, although he is slightly higher ownership projected than I would have expected. But simply a guy by nature of steals and blocks, and especially at the cheap price. It's the Slack notification. I presume so. Here, let's try... okay. I have muted the Slack site, so ping me a few times and see if I miss anything. Lonzo and Wendell Carter Jr., T.J. Warren, and Eric Gordon. Yeah, I was going to talk about Eric Gordon for a little bit there. Eric Gordon is almost more of a cash play for me, which seems weird because he's so inconsistent with his production. But what we're doing is we're sort of peeling off some of the upside, giving him more time next to Harden and Paul, and White and Forbes starting. Yeah, that's what I expected them to start. So they'll start White, Forbes, Aldridge, DeRozan, Gay, I imagine. Am I correct that you guys are no longer getting pinged? I have muted the site. Is that who they're starting? Yeah, they're starting Gay. So yeah, White, Forbes, DeRozan, Gay, Aldridge starting. That's what I would have thought. So a lot of this ends up being site dependent. The minutes on these peripheral Spurs pieces are all over the place, and it ends up who's playing well. Mills ends up in the middle where he almost always gets somewhere between like 19 and 27. Bryn Forbes has gotten all the way up to over 30 each of the last two games, and I do think in any sort of cashy contest, especially on FanDuel where he's the minimum, he makes the most sense. Bellinelli certainly in play, White certainly in play, and you like to see him getting the start, and his ownership will be down, and the starting news just coming out a dozen minutes before. I like White quite a bit now, and he is, I believe, the one who is priced super advantageously on DK. I mean, get that right. He's a lot of these guys are very much one side or the other. White's 3,800 on DK. That makes a fair amount of sense, and we certainly like the fact that he's getting the start because it gives some sort of basis for him getting more minutes. He's over 20 fantasy points each of the last two games, and 30 and 27 minutes. So, that's if we expect this to be kind of the new normal, and maybe Pomp has made some sort of decision, we'll try to stick more with Forbes and White, which does seem likely. I do think he's a guy who will be under-owned in the situation and make some sense to throw in on DK. I think I probably very slightly prefer Pat Beverly, but it's very close between those two guys for me. With Lou Williams out, Beverly, while not getting any kind of minutes like he was getting earlier this year, I think gets 20 plus and maybe as many as like 30 minutes, and at $3,600, Pat Beverly can obviously absolutely trash that number. So, I think I still slightly prefer Pat Beverly to White, but I would, if I was building 150 lineups, I would probably have something like 20 Beverly and 14 or 15 White, something like that, as I imagine where it would come out. I'd want some exposure to both those guys. And even, talking about these guys we're talking about, you can run Bryn Forbes on DK. 4,300 is not out of play. You can run Derek White on FanDuel. 4,600 is not out of play. It's a 4-game slate. If you're trying to, win the whole thing on some of these tournaments, you're going to have to get a little crazy with some of your lineups and exposure here. Bellinelli is always going to be in play. The minutes for him are very capped. He never gets 30. That just doesn't happen, whereas some of these other guys do. So raw points, they're going to profile better, but it is a matchup that looks fine for him. And even in the mid-20s, if you get 30 out of Bellinelli, that's a massive game. So not any kind of cash. Anyone know if Boban's starting? I don't expect Boban to get the start this evening, but left him in my tournament rankings. Certainly on DraftKings, keep an eye on it, and certainly have a Boban plan here. FanDuel GPP, Forbes, Evans, or Arcidiacono. It's going to depend on the rest of your lineup. I probably will suck down the chalk because I don't think Gortat is starting. Okay, did that just hit? Hey, there it is. So some lineups all came in the last couple minutes. The Clippers starting who we expected: Gortat at the 5, Gilgeous-Alexander and Bradley at the 4. Gilgeous-Alexander. Let's try that again. Gilgeous-Alexander and Bradley at the guards. Harris and Gallinari at the forwards. Again, White and Forbes in the backcourt for the Spurs, with Gay starting as well there. Gordon sticking in the starting lineup for the Rockets. and the Lakers starting who we presume they would as well: Ball, Hart, LeBron, Kuzma, and McGee. I like JaVale McGee. JaVale McGee was very good in the matchup between the Rockets and the Lakers earlier this year. He was very good countering. I'm going to pull up a stat drop I did before. Clint Capella last year when he was playing for the Warriors. Looking at the last two games, these players were on the court against each other. If nothing else, McGee played 20 minutes earlier this year and 11 minutes last year. He had 5 blocks in both of those games. His line earlier this year was 16 and 6, 2 assists, 5 blocks. His line last year was 13 points, 4 rebounds, and 5 blocks. Those are both very good for $4,500 in very nominal minutes. Again, they are trending away from him. We're getting him and Tyson Chandler splitting a ton of time there, and even having, brief flashes of Kuzma and LeBron at the 5 there. We haven't talked about Kuzma. More of a cash play for me. His price is up high enough now where, I just find it fairly unlikely he's going to cap out a ceiling on it, and you're paying, a premium for him versus any price earlier this year, and is in a spot that isn't particularly conducive to lots of production. Run down your top plays. Sure, I'm going to look at the games real quick and just bounce through them and talk about So again, you can play LeBron in anything. I have him ranked as the number 2 highest scoring player on the slate, though I only have him 3 points ahead of DeRozan. Harden, my overall top scorer. Chris Paul in a vacuum makes more sense without Harden. Alongside Harden makes sense as just a constrained construction. You are not going to have a lot of people playing both those guys next to each other. And if they go off, try to run it back with, at the very least, someone at Lonzo's level. JaVale McGee, I think, is a very strong tournament play. We haven't specifically discussed Clint Capella. I think he's fine. He is priced appropriately. It is difficult to go there over Vooch, for example, on FanDuel, but on DK, 8,200 is a number. Chandler Hutchison out. Okay, that's an interesting piece of news. Does not change a ton, but makes you feel a little better about your Bobby Portis plays if you had them, or God forbid, go with grace if you were running some Jabari Parker out, but he is also ill. Let me tell you, and these guys, we should really get them to stop making out in the locker rooms as much as they do, because the sickness really moves through there. In a tournament, I probably would play Kentavious Caldwell-Pope over Josh Hart. Like him more on FanDuel. Just because the ownership will be much lower. FanDuel, you're picking up the steal thing, which is something he is a bit more inclined to. I do think Hart is a better play, but only by like a raw point or two, even though I honestly think Josh Hart, I have it about 34 minutes, and KCP I have it about 24 minutes. Tucker is fine. Cash is just a cheap guy. Tournaments is a guy who can randomly get there. I don't have a strong take there. I don't have a strong take on Eric Gordon. Don't mind Gerald Green. Him and Daniel House are going to share a lot of those wing minutes, but having Ennis not there any longer does mean I think Gerald Green gets 23 minutes instead of 16. So Gerald Green, someone I didn't mention. You could put Nene in a tournament lineup. We saw last game that he can do some interesting things. On DraftKings, I would certainly rather play White than Forbes on FanDuel. Forbes the cash play for the Spurs as far as the cheap guys. In a tournament, I have no issue if you want to pivot to Mills or Arcidiacono or someone else, but Forbes is, I think, the safest play there, but it really depends what you're trying to do with your lineup. I like DeRozan. So much of DeRozan or Aldridge draw points before. That's DeRozan pretty significantly for me, by a little bit. I have DeRozan for just a hair under 50, and I have Aldridge for just a hair under 40. So DeRozan a better play for me pretty significantly, and that makes sense on a number of levels for me. Don't sleep on Rudy Gay. I think he's a just fine option. I have him and Harrison Barnes and TJ Warren all pretty similarly ranked. I've had trouble coming out with a preference among those 3 guys. Dirk's probably coming back. Yeah, we expect Dirk to play. I left him as a D-ranked guy in my GPP rankings on DraftKings. I'm certainly not trying to do it. 24 to 26 minutes for Portis and Dunn. Okay, that makes Portis legitimately a strong play at that point. If you believe that you are getting 24 minutes out of Bobby Portis, I would now rank him pretty nicely on FanDuel. I would project him in this matchup at 24 minutes for, probably about 26.5 fantasy points. It's a very good spot for him. Wendell Carter or McGee, DK, cash. I would play Carter in cash. I think Carter plays 28, 29 minutes. I think McGee plays 22, 23 minutes. I like McGee maybe even a little more in tournaments, but I like them both in tournaments. But between those two guys, I would play Carter in cash. And again, so now Ryan Arcidiacono, if Chris Dunn's playing 24, 26 minutes, Ryan Arcidiacono is playing 20 or 22. I don't like him that much when he's playing 30. That's somewhat instructive. Appreciate you guys hitting me with this news right as it hits. That is advantageous for all of us. Well done there. When someone gets a second, send me a message, by the way. Has the pinging stopped? Antonio Blakeney is active again. I left him out of my rankings because of that. I don't like him. I don't like Cameron Payne. I would have liked Cameron Payne more if I did not think that Blakeney was coming back, and he apparently is, so that's not great for either of them. I would play Payne over Blakeney, though, if you're trying to go with blowout. The ping stopped. Okay, so I will continue to go forward muting this site. See? Look at that. We accomplished something together. And we did it on a day like today, where we had time to get into all this shit. Want to make sure I discuss all the guys I have a take on. Again, I legitimately like Trevor Ariza. I think he will start. I think he will play. He's going to be low-owned, and him getting 35 tonight is probably very, very good for you. He would be better if it wasn't a slate with several other nice mid-price ranges. Again, I like Barnes. I like Warren. I like other guys who are in that median range there. Jonathan Isaac makes sense for me on either side as a tournament play. Eric Gordon is too expensive, but on DK, because you're spending $300 more than you're spending on Aldridge, and he just doesn't make sense as a point per dollar play, you will get Aaron Gordon, who is a guy who carries a ceiling. Again, I was saying if those with that news there, you have to be, I would think, a little upset about your Lauri Markkanen shares. They can play next to each other with him and Portis. You can still hear it, but it's very low. I don't know how you can hear it at all. The site is now muted. So weird, but figure it out later. Yeah, I'm going to try installing headphones. I mean, I have a set of headphones here, but I will try using them next time, and perhaps that solves this. Looking at some more questions. Vooch or Capella? I think Vooch is the cashier play, and Capella a fine tournament pivot. Side note, you love the notification jingle. That's good. I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. Coming in on time. Any news on Dennis Smith Jr.? I don't have it. So, again, have your guys in the appropriate slots on DraftKings or Yahoo if you're playing there, so that you can make a change if it is available. And that's the best way to get some value tonight. If both those guys are out, Brunson makes a lot of sense, and he'll be lower owned versus what he should be, where he's got safely 20 minutes and possibly 30, 34 against the Suns. And if Dennis Smith is in, he's going to be really, really low owned at $5,500. DJ or Ayton in a DK GPP? I think I slightly prefer Ayton for what I expect to be even lower ownership between those guys. And we'll do a little game of Daddy Like in about 30 seconds here. I am on the Twitter sphere trying to grab any 30 seconds to go news, but it doesn't appear like it is coming. And we will see how we did with our ownership projections today. Montrezl, I didn't mention. DK, being all the way down to 6,000, obviously has now started to factor an upside back in there. Not a matchup I particularly love for him, but especially with Lou out, that can make sense. A little overlay in the main somewhere. Okay, that's not something I can do a ton with 3 seconds until lock, but apparently there was a little overlay, which is the best news you can get if you are playing DFS. So we are locked. I will click through. I am not logged in. I will go back into FanDuel and click through a couple lineups there, and then look at some ownership on FanDuel and DK, and then release you all for the evening. Thanks for joining me on this, honestly, particularly shitty slate. I think we can say that with some degree of confidence, but it's intriguing, and there's always money to be made here. So clicking through some lineups on FanDuel in the 400K main event there. Chris Paul, 40% on the nose. James Harden, 39%. That feels pretty good. Daddy likes James Harden at 39%. Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, 6%. That feels pretty good. I like that because Josh Hart's going to be, I guess, somewhere close to 30. Gerald Green, 11. LeBron, 52. So, yeah, I'm very pleased with that. We'll check the DraftKings numbers in a minute, but LeBron, 52, Harden, 39. I think Harden outscores LeBron, so that feels good. Let's find some other guys. JaVale McGee, 5% on FanDuel. Again, the price on FanDuel is much harder to handle, so that's about where he should have been. Lonzo Ball, 9% on FanDuel. Again, the price there, he was 73 versus, say, 56. Nene, 1.3% on FanDuel. That does make a lot of sense because you're perfectly fine dropping that. It's sort of I'm not sure any of the centers are great. Josh Hart, 32.4%. So, yeah, about what I guessed. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope at 18% of the ownership at 5.9% versus 32.4% for Josh Hart. Yeah, that's yeah. Looking for most of the guys who are relevant in this game. I will pivot over to DraftKings in a second. Lance, 3%. Almost always in play in tournaments. Let's go ahead and look at DraftKings and look at their largest tournament, which is, I have no idea, the 350K Big Jam. Which, again, Big Jam. Does Big Jam mean something other than the most generic adjective you could think of in the word jam? Like, give me a stupendous jam. Give me a windmill. Give me, I don't know, something other than Big Jam. I'm just saying. Sell that shit or license it. Brought to you by this erectile dysfunction pill. Does your penis not work? Are you compensating by playing fantasy sports? Join the Viagra Big Jam. DK, James Harden, higher owned than LeBron James. Nominally 36.69 to 34.86. So 2% more there. So let's see. Let's think about why exactly that is. It's because on FanDuel there's better punts. The shooting guard position. It's very interesting. I feel like the shooting guards are better or worse than the small forwards on FanDuel. That's very interesting. Eric Gordon, 32%. Right, exactly. Lonzo, 26. Yeah, the price on DK is just too cheap. I mean, not the best matchup. Although he's been fairly successful against Chris Paul before, but not the best matchup. But still 5,600. Cheaper than Lonzo should be in tournaments. I wouldn't want to go there in cash. I consider a fairly perilous downside. 21% Kyle Kuzma. Yeah, like I wouldn't have wanted much of that. Like, you're fading him going and getting 50 against the Rockets. Really. Like, if he gets 40 again, you're fine. And I think he probably gets less than that. If he gets 28, you're in a good spot. So I would have been disinclined towards that. Chris Paul, 15%. Capella, 14. JaVale, 12. PJ Tucker, 12. Gerald, 6. KCP, 5. Tyson Chandler, 2.5. Daddy likes that. Daniel House, 2. Lance, 1.6. Nene Hilario, 1. Brandon Knight, 0.8. And then small shares of... Someone here must have played themselves. Brandon Ingram, 0.1%. And Rondo, 0.00. And Carmelo Anthony got shares. Congratulations. You gentlemen played yourself. I am going to look in the premium chat for a minute for any pending questions. Boban's still starting, right? No. Cortad is starting. That was announced, I don't know, about 13 minutes ago. Let's look at the YouTube chat. I wish I had more time. Nothing terribly compelling math problem. If you think player A is 3 times as likely to hit value as player B, but player B is 1/5 ownership, how much do you have of each? Unfortunately, nothing exists in a vacuum in DFS. So the presence of a third player, who I project to be half as likely as player A, but 1.5 times as likely as player B, and exactly halfway the cost between the two of them, and I expect similar ownership to player B. Like, it's always a matrix of plays. So if they were the only two players, and it depends, what size tournament you're interested in. In theory, if you did it perfectly, it would even depend, how much of the tournament goes to first place. So, yeah, that's a little bit of a sticky question. And again, the pivoting, I'm generally going to want to go with the lower owned guy more on the short owned slates. Like, if you look at this slate, let's assume these teams were all playing tomorrow and there were 8 other games, okay? I'd probably rather, if I projected Josh Hart for even like 3 more fantasy points, probably rather play Josh Hart over KCP, because Josh Hart would be 9% owned and KCP would be 2% owned. And I'm just fine with playing a guy I think is better who is 9% owned. On short slates, it ends up being a massive difference. Again, ownership isn't really the ownership itself, it's the 100% inverse value. If you have, if Josh Hart gets a bucket tonight, you increase, or if Josh Hart does badly tonight, you're catching up on 67% of the field. If KCP does badly, or if Josh Hart does well, you're whichever way. If KCP does badly, you're catching up on 91% of the field. It matters more the opposite than the actual value of the guy itself. So when they're both super not chalky and they're both single-digit owns, I think people misunderstand the distinction. Like, it's better that your guy is 2% owned than 9% owned, but not nearly as much as people make it out to be, and not actually 4.5 times better or something like that. So that differential, when you get down to smaller ownerships, I think is a common misconception. Acting like a guy at 5% owned is vastly better than a guy at 10% owned isn't really strictly accurate in my opinion. Would I rather take DFS advice from Josh Engelman or ship my money? I mean, they're fairly similar to my mind, and I'm not going to legitimately answer your question. But it's odd that you would pick the two of them, because I think they profile similarly as touts. They tend to have an eye towards mass multi-entering. They're certainly not identical by any means, but they weren't, if you were looking to pick two disparate guys, it's an odd choice there. Yeah. All right, so there it is. I will be back tomorrow, I believe, alongside Chris Spags on that show. I will start by muting this thing and figuring out why my audio is all jacked the hell up. I have a theory. But I want to mess around with a couple things, and hopefully we'll figure it out. So if you have any further questions, please go ahead and send me a tweet at FastEddieFear. Those of you who are already signed up for the premium service here at Awesemo.com. I'll be in Slack tonight working on some of these late slates starting, I think first one's in 20 minutes, so we can try to make some extra money there, and again, react to some of this late news. One of the biggest things you can do to make money is to flood those late slates when you have a lineup ready to go, and it's like, Beret is out, Dennis Smith Jr. is in. It's pretty nice to make that move and make some plays there. Or even better when you get, one of the best things you can do was, Kawhi is out just before a late slate, is, oh my god, load up on Lowry and get everything I can in there, because Kawhi is going to be 15% owned. So you're playing rakeless and with an advantage, and even throwing it in all the $1 and $2 head-to-heads you can find tends to be a pretty cash optimal play there. So with that, with no further ado, apologize again for the random technical difficulties at the beginning. We will get this squared away. We had a meeting today talking about standardizing our hardware and software usages, so that we're consistently starting and streaming effectively throughout the entire show, and I assure you we will follow up on that, and the first example to do so will be tomorrow. So I will see you all then.